Okay, so the first social development part that I'm going to talk about today is the role that sex and gender plays on early childhood development. When a baby is born, we often don't yell out, it's a person or it's a human, but instead we shout out, it's a boy or it's a girl. And sex is really the most important characteristic that people use to describe a baby. And all of the theories I'm going to talk about kind of talk about why. Why is gender so important when talking about children? So, the biological approach is the first theory I'm going to talk about, and they really see male and female differences as normal, natural, and necessary. And the example they give in the book is the man as hunter hypothesis. And they say that since men have always been hunters, they usually have characteristics such as aggression, ambition, leadership, and they have an interest in technological innovation as well. And they also give the example of how when men go to reproduce, they can reproduce with as many women as they'd like, where women really have to be selective with the men that they can reproduce with. And usually women will choose the man who is the strongest in order to create the strongest and most healthy baby. So because they have to be so selective, it gives men another reason to really be aggressive and competitive with one another. Oftentimes, people don't agree with the biological approach because women actually contribute much more to the sustenance in early human groups than a lot of our history books suggest. The next theory is the psychoanalytic theory. This one is mostly associated with Freud, and it is not until about age 4 that gender becomes a focus. This is when they notice that their anatomy might look a little different than other people's. They also start to notice that their anatomy might look more similar to their male parent rather than their female, or vice versa. And they just begin to notice these differences and begin to notice gender differences as well. And also, Freud describes women as inadequate and insecure. So, of course, there's a lot of disagreement with this theory. Next is the behavioral theory, which is when you learn gender appropriate behavior as a consequence of observing the adults of your same gender. So at age 2 or 3, people create a gender identity where they can identify with others of the same gender. And then kids who behave in a gender appropriate way are often rewarded. Cognitive development theory. This is where the understanding of gender is established cognitively, and as a result, children learn to behave in a gender appropriate manner. So it's almost the opposite of the behaviorist theory. Sandra Bem has an extension to the cognitive theory, and she theorizes that gender has 3 lenses. The first lens is gender polarization, where the human tendency to dichotomize the word gender. And she basically says that things are either male or female, and there's no room for ambiguity. Her second lens is androcentrism, which is the tendency to view things masculine as superior to things feminine. And then lastly, her third lens is the biological essentialism, which is the tendency to group gender differences to biology, thus becoming natural, normal, and necessary. Next is the interpretivist theory, which believes that the world of children must be seen as creative, collective, and autonomous. Children are not just passive recipients of messages provided to them by adults, which is what a lot of other theories suggest. They instead look at friendships, play groups, and peer cultures as sites to gain meaning about gender in children. And it is through these peer groups and play that behaviors and identities are constructed. Okay, next I'm going to talk about social development and diversity. When discussing diversity, Sociologists discuss gender, ethnicity, and social class, and each factor is very important in its own right, but they should also be studied in intersection. For example, being a female is very different when you are either rich or poor. So studying them in intersection is very important. Focusing on the preschool age is interesting because many of them are not aware of their identity, and many are often more aware with their gender than their social class or their ethnicity. Kids really view their families as their whole world, and they don't really begin to notice those differences of their family versus other families. With ethnicity, the book says that ethnicity is a cultural construct, and adults largely accept these categories, but they are learned factors to classify individuals. Preschool age kids often have not learned ethnicity's classifications. The example they gave in the book was about a kid, and his mom was trying to ask him about one of his fellow classmates. The mom said the class is about 50% white and 50% black. And when she's asking him about this kid, she describes him as white. And her son says, "There are no white students in my class. We're all brown." And he was technically looking at the color of all of his friends' skin. And since everybody is a different shade of brown, he said, "We're all brown." So they really don't see ethnicity yet, and because it's really a cultural construct. Also, with social class, preschool experience with diverse social class is even more limited than their experience with diverse ethnic groups. Preschool students spend time around their family, around their neighbors, and around their preschool population, who are often very class specific, and they remain unaware that their life experiences are tied to any sort of economic condition of their family.